Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. All right, well, welcome to Insights into Success. Today, we've got a special guest, Brenden from Master Talk. I'm not going to say what exactly it is he does. I'm going to let him do that. So, Brenden, I want you to take it away and tell us what exactly is your expertise.
Of course, Paul. Thanks so much for having me on. So yeah, absolutely. So I'm a communication expert. I started a YouTube channel called Master Talk a few years ago. And the mission is, I believe the next Elon Musk is a 7-year-old girl who can't afford me. So my mission is to make every single human being exceptional communicators. And then outside of that, I also run a public speaking coaching practice where I train executives and entrepreneurs to become top 1% communicators in their industries.
Okay, so then the immediate question I have to ask is, how did this all come about? Tell us a bit of your backstory.
Yeah, for sure, man. So when I was in university, I used to do these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing rugby or cricket or footy or some other sport, I wasn't really one of those types of guys. What I did instead is I did presentations competitively. So between the ages of 19 and 22, I probably presented a few hundred times. And I also coached 50 to 100 students on how to speak really well. And I never meant to start a YouTube channel or build a business. The goal was really to work as a consultant or in a nice corporate job, which is what I did for a few years at IBM. But before I started working there, I had the idea for Master Talk because I realized a lot of the stuff that I was coaching students on wasn't available for free in the market, because a lot of the advice you hear in the free category is, oh, Paul, you should jump up and down and speak. You should be yourself. And I said, this generalization isn't going to help anyone. So I started making videos, and then it turned into what it is today.
So what was it that you enjoyed about doing these presentations? Because like you kind of hinted at, most people, would be out maybe playing sports and doing stuff like that, and you're doing presentations. So what was it that really resonated with you that compelled you to want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be honest, it was really out of obligation. So the reason why most of us compete in case competitions, even if that's an optional activity in university, is because people who do cases tend to get the best jobs out of corporate. So I'll give you some context to help us understand this better. One of the biggest, actually the world's most prestigious case competition is in New Zealand. It's called Champions Trophy, and it's hosted in Auckland. And all the best universities across the world, pre-COVID, of course, would fly out to New Zealand to compete in Champions. And the reason we did these competitions was because a lot of the top executives from across the world would be judges and sponsor these competitions so they could pick the best students and recruit them into their companies before anyone else. Think of it like talent spotting in sports, but
Right.
in the business world. So one of the cases that was done at Champions Trophy a few years ago in New Zealand was Uber. But Uber, it wasn't just some teacher sitting there in the judging panel. You had most of the C-suite executives at Uber sitting down there and picking out the best students to give job offers to. So that was the reason why we did them. It just turned into an obsession later on.
So the thing I wonder about though is like the average person really wouldn't feel that that's an area that they particularly need to worry about. The average person going, maybe going to university, maybe not. They come out into the workplace, kind of don't really feel like they need to worry about upskilling themselves on their public speaking. So what would you say to people like that?
Yeah, I would say that if your goal is to be a high achiever, you want to be an executive at a company, a CEO, a president, a thought leader, a speaker, or really achieve excellence in any area of life, I always argue that even if you're a good communicator, being exceptional is the only way forward. And the reason is because at the top of any career, of any field, most of that job is people management. If you're the CEO of a company, you're not really doing much deliverables. You're
Right.
coaching other people. You're teaching other people. If you're a top speaker like Tony Robbins, You're speaking, you're engaging, you're sharing ideas. So even if you're an above average communicator, I always argue that you get promoted on EQ, you get clients on EQ, emotional intelligence, and you move forward, you build a network, you build relationships through EQ. So that's what I would say is I would argue that communication is the most valuable tool out of any skill set that you could ever develop in your life. And Warren Buffett seems to agree as well.
Okay, well, if Warren Buffett agrees, and that's always a good sign, isn't it? So, from your point of view, what do you consider are the key benefits of being able to master public speaking?
Of course, so there's so many, but let me simmer it down to three main ones. I would say the biggest one is you'll stand out from your industry. What I always tell my clients or on podcasts is if you communicate only 20% better than anyone else in your industry, you will stand out 100% of the time. So let me repeat that again. If you communicate just 20% better than anyone in your industry, you will stand out 100% of the time. What does that mean? If you're already working in a company and they're deciding between three people for their next promotion, the person who generally communicates the best gets the promotion if they have the same skill set as everyone else on the selection team. But if you're getting interviewed for a potential role at a company and you all have the same CV, it's the person that's able to articulate their value and is able to really demonstrate why they're a good fit for the role and also the culture that ends up getting picked. It has not really to do with the accomplishments on your CV. It's how you present those accomplishments and how you package them. That's the first one, is it gives you an edge in anything you end up doing in life. The second key advantage to communication is it applies to everything, not just the boardroom. Communication is everything we do, Paul, and I'm sure you know this, right? It's the way that you talk to your significant others, the way you talk to your children, it's the way you talk to the people around you, your family, and your best friends. So the better you are at communication, the less conflict you have. And that's why I'm able to live with my mom, my sister, and my 89-year-old grandfather. And there's no yelling in the house because I'm a great communicator. I'm able to engage, I'm able to listen. So it helps you in all areas of life. And the third main benefit to communication is it allows you to amplify your ideas. If you're a business owner, if you're someone who has a great idea, communication is what allows you to scale it. Think about this podcast. If I was talking like this, hi everyone, my name is Brenden, I'm the founder of Mass. No one wants to listen to me. No one wants to look at the ideas. No one wants to follow my YouTube channel or take the action that I want them to take. And that's also true. People are listening. Communication allows you to take that idea you have and share it with millions of people around the world.
Yeah, and so often we see examples where problems arise because of poor communication.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So what you're saying, though, is that you could have two people and their CVs could look quite similar to one another. One could actually be more capable than the other in terms of maybe execution, but the other one's more skilled in their communication, their public speaking, etc. So if I'm understanding you correctly, that person that with the more highly attuned communication skills potentially will perform better, do better than the other person who may be technically more capable than them, but the communication skills will win the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would particularly comment on that in terms of the gap between those two candidates at the executive level. So if you're starting an entry-level job, sure, if your communication skills aren't perfect, it doesn't really matter because you're tasked to do one deliverable and knock out that deliverable and then switch. But once you get into a project management role and you really start to move up in a company, I would argue that communication is not just the difference maker in an interview, but it's also logical, because a large part of your job as an executive is what we call executive eminence. It's the way that you deliver a message. So when you're a manager or somebody under manager, and you're giving feedback as an example, you leave people informed. But if you're an executive, it's also important for you to leave people inspired, because the war for talent is really strong these days. So if you're not able to not only deliver feedback, but in a way where people go, wow, I can't believe I get to work with Paul every day, they'll never leave you. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits there, and people who don't have eminence and aren't able to communicate in a way that gets people excited to work with them at the executive level, you won't be able to move up in a company, in my opinion.
And so for you, to what extent has your communication skills impacted on your life? Can you give me like some examples of where it's really made a difference for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easiest place to start is definitely my personal life. With my mom, my sister, the people around me. Communication has definitely benefited me in that way. And the reason is because when we communicate ideas, it's usually statement. I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. And it becomes this yell fest really quickly. Whereas, with my communication skills, I realized really fast that, hey, it's more important to ask questions. In the same way you're asking me questions, it's more important to get people's perspective. Why does my mom believe that about life? Why does my sister believe that about life? Once I'm able to understand that perspective, it also helps me build a better rapport, build better trust, and so I can live life happier and more fulfilled. That's one piece. The second piece is definitely the business side. Because I'm a great speaker, I guess in the context of what I do, I should be, or else or else I probably shouldn't be a communication coach.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also in the context of business as well. When I run free trainings as a lead generation tool, when I'm presenting videos on YouTube, when I'm showing up on a podcast, and more importantly, at the end of a sales process, when I'm on a call with a potential client and I'm walking them through what we do in our process, if I'm not able to answer their questions and I don't sound confident, I don't have that certainty in what we have, what we offer, and the results that we bring, I won't make much money and I probably have to go back to corporate, right? So that's the second benefit I see. And then probably the third one outside of personal life and business is really just leisure. I think when you're a great communicator, it also allows you to meet new people, to engage in new ways, and allows you to get out of your comfort zone and try new exciting things that you wouldn't otherwise without the right communication skills.
So do you think that having strong communication skills, that's a key benefit that enables you to be better in terms of sales? Because you're talking before about, when you're working with people, talking to people about potentially agreeing on a contract for whatever that may be. Do you think that because you have attuned your communication skills, that better enables you to communicate and to negotiate and ultimately to sell to potential clients?
Absolutely. And I can demonstrate that right now. So let's say Paul was trying to look for a communication coach and he's going through two vendors. Both vendors are just as good at delivering the service as the other. And this is how both of the vendors interact in the call. So let's go with vendor number one. So vendor number one sounds something like this. Hi, Paul. Hope you're doing well. Let's get started. And let's get started. If you have any questions, let me know. So that's vendor one. Vendor two. Yeah. Hey, Paul, how's it going? I hope you're having a wonderful day. Would love to walk you through our process. But first, let me ask you a couple of questions. I'd love to hear more about why is communication coaching something you want to invest in? You're clearly someone who's already really accomplished. So would love to hear more. So notice the energy is very different between those two people. And especially in my business, a lot of the decision-making is very emotional, right? That's just one example of many. We could also do the same thing in a job interview, right? Candidate one, hi, my name is Brenden and blah, blah, blah. Candidate two, hi, my name is Brenden Kumar. So if there's anything that you take away from this interview is I help others achieve rocket ship level success. It's just the energy and how we show up makes all of the difference in the world and helps you stand out and win the deal or get the job that you want.
But, in the examples that you just gave me, it was relatively subtle, though. Like, you weren't over the top with it. Your tonality changed, but it was at what I'd describe as a sincere level. Because what you see with some people is they will be over exuberant, and it just becomes a bit much and actually have the detrimental impact. You sort of go, oh, that's not sincere. That's not right. But what you did was you kept it at a level which to me sounded sincere. And also, too, you're asking questions.
Absolutely. I would say the big two differences, and great point out there, great observation. The difference is really mirroring in energy, because what sounds sincere to one person doesn't sound sincere to another. And that's really the nuance. To somebody like you, Paul, you're a bit more introverted, a bit more shy. So I need to change my energy when I'm speaking to you, when I sound like this. But that's not my natural state. My natural state is more like this whenever I'm talking to people. So if the person on the other side of the call is more extroverted like me, I bring up my energy level so I
Right.
adapt to you, whereas most
Right.
communicators aren't able to do that.
So I guess then, based on that, one of the skills that you've developed is to be able to very quickly assess who you're communicating with, and therefore communicate in a manner that would be consistent for the type of personality that you're talking to.
Absolutely. This is a term I refer to as in my programs and my videos as communication agility. It's the ability for you to quickly shift based on each segment, each idea, each conversation discussion you're in. So one example that I give is, what is the difference between the CEO of a company and a vice president from a communication perspective? Well, the CEO of a company in a day can go through all of these situations. Phone call with their 5-year-old daughter. How's your day, Sally? To they're getting sued for $5 million, to they're opening a new theme park, let's say Sea of Disney, in a different country, to their top executive just quit all of them. All those 4 situations can happen the exact same day for someone who's running $100 million business. And what the CEO has to be able to do is not let the emotion of their previous situation start to overwhelm them in future situations that they're having in the same day at work.
And how would you train someone to do that? Because that's quite a challenge. It's hard to prevent an event permeating throughout the day and impacting on your state of mind and how you're projecting yourself.
Absolutely. I would say communication agility is a much harder topic to grasp, but I'll try and give like kind of a nugget that's the easiest the thing to implement. So I would say for communication agility, the key piece is predicting what are the 5 situations at work or in your life that are bound to happen, and how can you react better emotionally. So what I do with individuals, people can implement this right now as I'm talking, is write down 5 situations in your life where you feel the most stressed from a communication perspective. Is it when you guest on a podcast? Ooh, I wonder what Paul's going to ask me. Is it when you pitch a service to a company? Is it when you're doing one-on-one feedback meetings with people that you manage? For all of us, those situations are different, and rank them in level of stress, and then start with the most stressful one and go, why do I show up in that way? And start asking yourself questions. It's easier to do this with like friends and family. Coach, if you have the money. If not, just do it with like friends and family around you. Go, why am I stressed out in this situation? Really start to break that down. That's the first step. The second step is to ask yourself, what does a 10-time stressor environment look like? So for example, if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, Brenden, I'm really stressed out when I give a presentation at work, my reply is always, okay, let's make you do a presentation and make it 10 times harder. So we're going to bullet you with questions. We're going to write a bunch of stuff, throw a bunch of curves along your way. So when you get to the actual meeting, you're going to laugh during the whole thing. So it's all about doing the more stressful thing so that the actual situation becomes less challenging. And then the third piece of communication agility, to keep it simple today, is to then reflect on the progress you've made. Oh, wow, last week when I started this exercise, I was really stressed with point number 1. And now I'm just a little bit less stressed. So you see that progress, you reflect on that, and then you gain the momentum to go, okay, let's go through situation 2, situation 3. And then the momentum starts building up really quickly. And your confidence also starts to build up really quickly as well.
Right. It's interesting when you were talking before. I've had a guest on who's an expert in negotiation. And one of the things that she talked about was to be successful at negotiation, that you need to understand the other person's position. That often what happens is that, you have 2 parties come in and they're kind of at loggerheads, and one's trying to obviously get the better on the other one and so forth. Whereas her approach is to actually sort of pull it all back and understand the other person's position, to talk to them, ask them questions. And by doing that, in her opinion, you are able to achieve a better result for everybody. And I guess just listening to you, kind of that really resonated with me, and what you're saying really too, the importance of actually asking questions to understand other people's positions rather than meeting them with a confrontational type approach.
Completely agreed with you. I find questions are really the key to life, because what questions allow us to do, similar to what your other guest mentioned, and he or she is absolutely right on that, is the idea of the more questions you ask, the more information you have, and the more information you have, the better you can message back what you want back to them. Right? So if you're on a sales call and all you're doing is talking about your products and services, that person will always lose to the other individual who walks in and says, Paul, tell me more about you. What does your business like? Where do you want to go? And then uses the exact answers you're delivering back at you.
Right. So for you, what would you describe as the biggest mistakes that you see that people typically make with their communication, whether it be in personal scenarios or in business scenarios?
Yeah, to keep things simple, I would say the most common one is the ability to practice public speaking. This is how most people practice, Paul. They go through a presentation and they just ramble through the whole thing. And then they ramble through the whole thing, top to bottom. And they just do that over and over again. And then they're super stressed because, like, every time I practice, it takes me 30 minutes. And then my presentation's tomorrow. I only get to practice 5 times. I can't make it. I'm stressed. And then they have a bad mindset whenever they jump in. Whereas the strategy I always like to recommend is what I call the puzzle method. So public speaking is a lot like a jigsaw puzzle, Paul. You know those puzzle pieces we used to do as kids? I used to put them together. So if I asked you, don't worry, it's not a trick question, it's super easy. If you were to work on a puzzle yourself with, your family or yourself, which pieces would you start with first and why?
Well, everyone would normally start with the edges because it's the easiest to identify.
Absolutely, right? Because of those little edge pieces. So start with the edges first and go into the middle. But in public speaking, we tend to do the opposite. We tend to start with the middle first and then go towards the edges, which means we shove a bunch of content. We go to the presentation. It sounds something like this. You're like rambling through. You get to the last slide. You go, yeah, so thanks. Not the right way to practice. Practice like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Practice your introduction 50 times. Not 2 times, not 3 times. Do it 50 times. 50 seems like a big number. Really isn't. Because your intro is like, what, 2 minutes, 1 minute? Won't take you that long. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie, right? 50 times the conclusion. And after only 1 or 2 hours of practice, you'll have the momentum you need to say, wow, this is the best introduction and conclusion I ever gave in my life. Now let me tackle the middle.
Right. And for you, do you ever, or can you remember ever getting nervous doing presentations? How long ago was that when you felt that? Or do you still feel it?
Oh, yeah, of course, Paul. I think anyone who says that they don't have any fear at all communication is either lying or probably psychopathic, maybe. Who knows? I don't even know if that's the right word in English. But here's the reason why I say that. Like, I struggled with communication my whole life. Like, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I grew up in a city called Montreal. And in Montreal, you need to know how to speak French. It's one of the languages you need to learn to do business here, to get a job. So my parents, of course, made the right decision to send me to French education system, the study in French. But at the time when I was 6 years old, 5 years old, I didn't like the sound of that because I didn't know the language. So my whole life, not only did I struggle with communication, I had to present in a language I didn't even know. So I'd walk up and say, bonjour. That was my life. I sucked at communication.
Yeah.
So yeah, we all start somewhere, and I was definitely not the exception to the rule. I was really bad at communication. Of course, when I started Mass Truck a few years ago, just so people have the context, I started coaching C-suite when I was 22 years old. And of course, like that sounds impressive, but it was really scary because some people I would coach, my oldest client today is 57. I was coaching people, and I still do, that have worked in their companies or ran their businesses longer than I was alive. Right. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of nerves, and I still do, just a lot lower than I used to. And the advice that I always share on this is the goal is not to remove the nerves. Think of it like a boxing match. So on one side of the ring, you have your fear, your nerves, your anxiety, your stress around communication. And the other side of the ring is your message. So the goal is not to remove the fear. The goal is to make sure that your message gets the knockout punch every single time. So even if my fear was quite high, even when I started my YouTube channel, I was like, I don't have a PhD. Who am I to talk about this? but the message of helping 15-year-olds, 13-year-olds, girls and boys who couldn't afford communication coaches, obviously, because they're 13, 15 years old,
Yeah.
the message was so important that I pressed record anyways. That's the magic. It's not about removing the fear. It's making sure that the message matters more than the fear, so you win every time.
Right. Right. So for you touched on this before, how your communication skills weren't great when you were young. So what became your turning point? When did it all start to shift and you actually you've made it, really your life's passion, I guess?
Yeah, for sure, Paul. For me, the shift was really university. So after I switched back into an English curriculum and I started doing cases and competing professionally, I mostly did it out of necessity. My parents were minimum wage workers. I didn't have a lot of money. So I saw corporate as my way out, which it ended up being before I started Mass Talk as a business. So,
Yes.
working at companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I interned for a year, working at companies like IBM, a lot of those companies in my city, most of the individuals who are guaranteed placements in those organizations did cases. So I mostly did out of necessity, but I'm a very competitive person. So I didn't want to just go there and get fifth place. So after I did the first and the second competition, I said, man, I have to get really good at this speaking thing. So I grew an obsession in being the best speaker in the programs and the competitions I was attending. That's really the shift where it happened for me.
So for you, when you were at university, what was it that you actually studied? Like when you went to work for, IBM, etc., what were you actually doing? Because I'm assuming it wasn't communication per se at that point.
Yeah, great point on that. You're absolutely right. I studied in accounting, actually. I wanted to be an accountant since I was 12. So yeah, I worked at Price in accounting, and then I did technology consulting at IBM.
Okay, that's kind of interesting where if we want to stereotype the image of an accountant and then you don't, well, you at least aren't projecting an accountant's image right now. And I don't want to be shocked by accountants by overgeneralization, but it's hard not to.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm probably the person you would least expect to become a communication coach, but in some ways it actually helped me because a lot of those case teams in business school, we had accounting teams too. So I had the added challenge of trying to get those guys and gals to present really well, which is
Right.
a really hard thing to do. How do you take accounting and make it exciting and tax? So that experience really helped me later in life.
So a question I've wanted to ask you is, like, when we talk about, say, producing YouTube videos or doing blogs, etc., I guess the general consensus out there is that you should just get going and start doing it. So with your videos, don't wait for perfection. Just get out there and start producing them, and you'll get better over time at that. And that the message is that content is king. So if you've got good content, but maybe your camera work's not brilliant, or maybe your delivery, you're saying too many ums and ahs and all that sort of thing, that can be taken care of over time. But priority number one is the content. When it comes to public speaking, what's your view there? Is content king or is delivery king?
Great question, man. So let's think about it, right? I'm sure speech coaches across the world have argued this for millennia. I've been fighting wars over whether or not content and delivery is more important. So let me go ahead and put a rest to this with this argument. Think
Right.
about your high school education. How much do you actually remember from high school? Your history teachers, your math
Not a lot.
teachers. And why is that? I mean, they had all the content in the world. These are individuals who have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, highly educated individuals, probably with some of the best content out there. But why do we remember nothing? Right? Now let's think about the opposite scenario. Think about a time where the delivery was so exceptional, but the content wasn't so great. Think about your favorite
Right.
movie. Think about a YouTube video that really resonated with you, a thought leader that you really admire. And that's really the key here, is even if you have the best content in the world, if your goal, because my definition of communication is specifically to use a message and to impact a greater number of people with that message. So under
Right.
that definition, making the argument that content is king probably doesn't make much sense versus saying Delivery is king if and only if you have at least one idea worth sharing, right? And that's why I
Right.
always argue that delivery is more important than content, all things being equal. For the simple reason that if you think of somebody like Tony Robbins that I went to a seminar for just last week, the best speaker on the
Yeah.
planet, I would argue. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of things that he said, but if he only just but he said the same thing over and over and over again, which is the secret to living is giving. The secret to living is giving. That's a quote that I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
So interesting, you're saying about going to see Tony Robbins. So from your point of view with him, is he someone that has just progressively crafted his skill over the years of being a great public speaker? Or do you think he's just always naturally been gifted in that point, from that point of view? And that question, not just to Tony, but in general, do you think that some people are just naturally more gifted in that regard? Or is it something that's very much you can construct, and it's not about having a natural talent, but it's about being very progressive and analytical in your approach and developing your skill?
So the nutshell is I believe both. So let me go ahead and explain why I believe both. So it's kind of like being a professional athlete, right, Paul? There's some part of that which is natural talent, like take somebody like Michael Jordan or Shaquille O'Neal or Kobe Bryant in the context of basketball. You can't just raw work 16 hours a day for 15 years to get into the NBA. It just doesn't work that way. I don't have the genetics to be in the NBA. It just doesn't work. But in those three people's cases, it was a mix of skill, raw talent, but also the ability to really work hard and develop that talent. But what I will add is if I did work 16 hours a day playing basketball for 10 years, would I get into the NBA? No. But would I be in the top 5% of all basketball players in the world? Absolutely. Right? So it doesn't mean I'm the best in the world at basketball, but I could probably beat 95, 97% of all basketball players in the world if I practiced that many hours. I think communication is the same way, but a lot easier to master. I've seen introverts who don't want to speak at all become like the really exceptional communicators. The learning curve with public speaking is way, way, way easier. We could take somebody who knows nothing about communication just by watching videos or listening to this podcast. If you just put in that work, I would say in 15 hours, 20 hours of practice max, you would be at least 10 times better than where you started. It's just most people don't put in the reps.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. So from your point of view, Tony Robbins, you think he's a bit of both, do you think? Lots of practice and a bit that way inclined?
Absolutely. Let's give the context for people, because I find a lot of people, this is a quote I always use, people say, wow, they never ask how. So whenever they see someone like Tony, they go, oh my God, wow, it's Tony, but they don't ask how. How did you get there? What's the process like? So when you ask how more. Right, so let's understand the how behind Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins started in personal development speaking when he was 17 years old.
Yeah,
Paul. He's 61 now. He's been in the same industry for 44 years. Not many people can say that.
Right? A lot of practice.
Right, it's a process. That's the first thing. Second thing, he's been doing the same event for over 30 years. The one I attended, Unleash the Power Within, is his entry-level event. And he's been doing the same event, the same 3-day, 4-day experience, the same speakers, the same rhythm, for 30, 40 years. So it's not that he's changing up the content. In fact, the content is always the same and it'll always be the same, but the way he delivers it improves over time. So of course, there's a lot of reps. And the third piece that not a lot of people know for Tony is he can go on for 10, 12 hours straight, like no bathroom breaks at all. He just keeps speaking and speaking and speaking and speaking. And what that does is it improves your stamina. So yes, do I think Tony had some raw talent? Of course. But I also believe 90% of that was just sheer work ethic, if not 95%.
Right. Now, getting back to you, and you mentioned before you've got a YouTube channel. So I just want to understand, when you started that YouTube channel, when you were creating your videos, how much of a perfectionist were you? So to what extent did you try and record over and over again to get it right, as opposed to just kind of like, okay, well, I just need to get on with this and I'm going to get better over time? I want to get an inside view of your psyche on that.
Of course, right? It's an interesting question. Where do you drive the balance between the two? So here's my perspective. I would say in the first year, I'm just giving a number that I think makes sense for most people. In the
Yeah.
first year of content creation, only quantity matters. So my first 30 videos, 40 videos, 50 videos, I didn't edit a single one. I literally did them on a couch right over there, right, with the phone, no editing. I mean, if you don't, for people who don't believe me, go watch my YouTube. They're still up, like the first couple of ones. And my videos literally sound like this. Hi, everyone. My name's Brenden. I wish I dressed better, too. I didn't even get the message, or the lighting, too, that I have now. So I had none of that. I was a broke student when I started Master. I started working at IBM, so I had no money. So I was just making videos. But, and there's a big but here, after a year of content creation, or 6 months or 9 months, and we're over the whole I'm scared to post, right? And we're over that hump. Now we have to start having a more important conversation for those of you who actually want to make a difference in the world with your content, which is a question most of us don't think about. What do you want your personal brand to be in a decade? Not days, but decades. When we think about our personal brand in the next 10 years, where is Brenden going to be in 10 years of this content? Where does Paul want to be in 10 years? Then the way you approach your content strategy changes dramatically. So instead of going to TikTok, that's really hot, or Instagram, that's really hot and new and trendy, you instead ask a very different question, which is, what do I want my brand to be in 10 years? What expertise do I want to share? And then you transition from quantity to quality. So now,
Right.
after 8-9 months of grinding out Master Talk 3 years ago, I got really good on camera after making hundreds of mistakes. And now my strategy with Master Talk is a lot more intentional. I post once a week. It's really structured. I write out my entire script, and I spend a lot more time obsessing over the quality of the work that I do. But I don't recommend that until you've clearly made an intentional decision with yourself that this is something you want to do for the next 5-10 years.
Right. And so for you, what does the next few years look like? What are you wanting to achieve in the next, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that the thing I'm the most excited about, Paul, behind, the growth of my business is really the growth of the impact. There's so many people in the world who can't afford a speech coach, especially with the rates that some of the best people in the world charge these days, which can
Yeah.
range into up to $1,000 an hour. So I would say for me, the thing I'm the most passionate about is, how do I democratize communication? Like, I don't pitch on my YouTube channel. I don't share other stuff like that. For me, it's really having that communication, having that information accessible to anyone who wants to go out there and really become a high performer. Who's 15, who's 17, who's 19, or who's in their 40s, right? Who's just getting started on their journey. So that's really what I'm more excited about, is scaling that impact, and that will lead to everything else.
And so in your industry, I mean, how populated is it? How many sort of, people are out there actually doing what you do? And what do they typically look like? Are they generally a lot older than you? Can you just give us a bit of insight into that?
Yeah, happy to give a flavor. So I would say most speech coaches are generally in their late 30s, 40s, 50s. So they're much older than I am. They generally have
Right.
an academic education around communication, masters, PhDs, bachelor degrees. And I'd say most of them are old white men, mostly.
Right.
But I don't want to give statistics because I'm not really familiar either. That's usually
Yeah.
what the industry looks like. I would say in my category, which is speech coaching for 5-6 years, because I'm like 5 years into the business now, but I'm still in my 20s. I'm probably in a very, very small percentage of people in that specific category. So yeah, does that shine a light?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so for you touched on it before about imposter syndrome. So for you, to what extent, given what you've just described me, has that impacted on your self-confidence? And secondly, what has been the reception by people that you're interacting with? Do they go, oh gosh, he's quite young, I'm not sure that you know a lot, or oh, you don't have a PhD in it, so oh no, you're probably not skilled enough? So talk me through your imposter syndrome, and also what has been the feedback from the general public.
Of course, I'm glad you asked that question. So let's talk about imposter syndrome for a bit, because I know that a lot of people struggle with this, and I used to as well. So I'm happy to shine a light on this. Let's use an example. Okay, let's say I came to Auckland, where you live in New Zealand, and I said, hey, Paul, what should I do here? I'm on vacation in Auckland. What should I do during the week? You would say, "Oh, Brenden, welcome to the city. You should go eat at these restaurants. You should go visit these places, go to these islands, do these things, go hang out, do that. You'll have a great time."
Yeah.
In the same way, if you came to Montreal where I live and you said, "Hey, Brenden, new to the city, what should I do for a week?" I should probably no. I'll probably tell you. I'll go, "Oh, go to these restaurants. Oh, you got to check out this place." But me
Yeah.
and you, we're not experts of our cities. Our dads aren't the mayor of Auckland and Montreal. We're not tour guides, yet we still openly share the information. So the question
Yeah.
we'd ask ourselves is, why is it with certain pieces of information, we're very open about it, but with others, especially related to our subject matter expertise, which is ironic if you think about it, we go, "Oh no, I shouldn't share that. Oh, I don't want to share that information with Paul." So
Yeah.
why is there a discrepancy there? And I've asked myself this question a lot. And the reason there's a discrepancy is most of us have the wrong definition of what an expert really means. Let's discuss. So what does an
Okay.
expert actually mean? A lot of us think society or culture, we think expertise means that you have a PhD. You have a master's degree, that you have some bachelor's, you have all these academic backgrounds. And that's something I heavily disagree with. I think expertise just means that you're one chapter ahead of the next person in that particular thing. So in the same way that you know more about me, more than me, excuse me, on how to host a podcast, how to
Hmm.
organize a live stream. Like I always guest on shows, but I have no idea how to use StreamYard, right? Like all of
Right.
those key skills that you have,
Yeah.
or being on in Auckland, like you just know the city more than I do. In the
Yeah.
same way, I can teach you as well. Not in Auckland, not on podcasting. You're miles ahead of me, but in YouTube channel, in public speaking, in storytelling. So it's not about saying how do I be an expert to everyone, but rather saying how can I start by helping other people that I'm comfortable serving. So at the beginning, I didn't start with C-suite. Even if I say that, I started
Right.
with kids who are younger than me. Yeah, I'm comfortable coaching 15-year-olds. Then I started coaching people my own age. Then I coached seniors, managers, and then it came up, and now I coach mostly C-suite managerial positions. But I didn't
Right.
start there. That's the key difference. Whereas the mistake most people make with imposter syndrome is they go, "I'm an expert for nobody," which isn't true. Think about the relationship a parent has with its kids. Parents don't always give the best advice for their kids, but they love giving advice anyways. So we're comfortable sharing advice. Just share it with the people you're comfortable serving first.
Right. Okay. That makes good sense and puts it in a good context. I think the natural inclination is more to compare yourself to the most knowledgeable person on that subject in the world and think, well, I don't know as much as them, so I need to just be quiet because I'm not credible. Whereas you're saying it's all about increments, incrementally a little bit more than maybe a few people. So to them, you are their expert, and that's good enough.
Absolutely. And the second part of your question, which is how did I get buy-in from executives early? I'll be
Yeah.
honest, when I say I got lucky, right? I met the right relationships, the right mentors who bought into me and who transferred their trust into other people. But what I also think as well is never sell someone who doesn't want to be sold. I'm not going to go out there and talk to the CEO, white American of a big bank and say, "Take me as your speech coach." That won't work. They'll laugh me out at the boardroom. Right?
Yeah.
Versus going, who are the people who are the most open-minded, and how do I make sure, this is the important piece, how do I make sure that I deliver better results than the competition? Right? So it's not enough to just be young and innocent, which also gives me an edge, and we could talk about that surprisingly if you
Yeah.
talk
Okay.
if you see it that way. But the other piece as well is for the people who do buy into you, make sure you deliver exceptional results for those people. So a lot of my clients that I started with, which is the majority of them, worked with multiple speech coaches before and didn't really get them the result. Whereas my pitch to them, it wasn't really a pitch, but my discussion to them was, if I don't deliver the result, I'll just give you your money back. So they said, "Well, that's a no-brainer." And then it took me 2 hours to get
Yes.
them a result. They said, "Okay, this person knows what they're talking about." And that's the key.
So for you, just touching on that, then word of mouth, I assume that's been a good source of business for you.
Oh yeah. 80-90%.
Right. And you touched on before, you said before about talking about it too, about the advantage of young and innocence, I think you said, or something similar. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know what I always tell young people, Paul, is you have every excuse in the world to not deliver anything. It's literally true. Even if I've done well because I focused on the same thing. I've been coaching since I was 19, so I had the experience. But I would tell people is executives want to get to know young people, the good ones. Like the people who don't want to talk to you, we don't want to talk to them anyways. But I'm saying the people who are well-intentioned, the people who have the right values, the people who want to help the next generation, they're a lot more keen to a conversation with a 20, 22, 25-year-old than they are someone their own age. Because someone their
Right.
own age messages them, they go, what's in it for them? Why are they messaging me? What's their intent? Whereas
Right.
if I message people, they go, oh, he probably wants some help. I should probably take his call. And that's the really key difference. And that also helps when I'm at live events. Like let's say the Tony event I went to, I met a lot of high level people who are 100 times more successful than me, but they want to help me because they see themselves in me. In the
Right.
same way that the other guy who's double my age, like I don't want to help that guy. He's probably trying to get something from me. But this Brenden guy, he's filled with pure intent, which I am. Obviously, I help people, but being young really, really helps. What I always tell young people is don't lose your lead. If you're already ahead, you're already delivering products, and you're scared,
Right.
just don't lose your lead. Keep pushing it.
Don't lose your lead. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that means that you've got a fairly small window of opportunity while you're young, or you may need to engage in plastic surgery as you get older to still keep still take advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely. I probably have 5 good years on me where I can use the young card. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people, they see me and they go, oh, yeah, you're so young. Look at your YouTube channel. I only have that grace for 5 more years. So I got to build my business while I still can.
Right. So you need to do it fast.
Yeah, that's the key.
All right. So for you, okay, can you just to close this off, give us maybe just a couple of little basic tips on things that people can take away to help them with their presentation and public speaking skills?
Sure, I'll give 3. So one that we talked about earlier, this interview, is the puzzle, right? Just start practicing your presentation like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges, then work your way into the middle. That alone will 10x your presentation. Because most of the times when you're practicing, you're just practicing the whole thing all the time instead of practicing strategically. So just have that mindset when you go in, practice your intro a few more times, and you'll be able to hook in your audience, even if you make mistakes during, because they'll be so impressed with your first impression. That's the first tip. Second tip is ask more questions rather than statements. So this is a quick trick on how to listen more effectively. A lot of people say you want to be a better listener, but they don't explain how to do it. So the way I think about it is, what is your ratio between the statements that you give versus the questions that you ask? So of course, I'm not a good example of this in this interview because I have to answer questions. I can't really throw any back because it's that the intention of the show is to pull out the expertise from me. But outside of this, if me and Paul were just having a conversation, I don't like to talk this much, even if I'm a communication coach. Really like asking you about your life. You're probably more successful than I am in many areas of life that I'm not. And I want to know the answers. So just ask yourself more questions and ask more questions to other people instead of statements. That would be the second piece of advice. Because most people talk like this. I believe this. What do you believe? I believe this. Then I believe this. I believe this. Versus, why do you believe that? Why is that important to you? And that gives you a lot more perspective and a more fulfilled life. And the third one is an easy trick you can do on a daily basis. Requires no coaching, no accountability partners. You can even do this alone in your house. It's called the random word exercise. So all you do is you pick 5 random words a day. Light bulb, basement, floor, and you make presentations out of thin air. So let's say you take avocado, do a presentation on that. What this does is it improves your resiliency as a speaker. So when you go back into your boardroom meetings, as an example, those presentations become a lot easier because you say to yourself, well, I've done the same thing for 10 years. If I can talk about avocados, pretty sure I can talk about this stuff.
So tell me too, just what you're talking occurred to me. Do you, because of what you do, are you forever by habit analyzing people and their communication skills? So like you might be out on a social event. Does your mind tune into analyzing, who you're talking to, their communication skills, or do you kind of turn off to it and you just kind of like everybody else?
Unfortunately, when you are obsessed, Paul, I'm sure as you know, there is no up switch to obsession. So no, the analogy I use to describe this for people, it's like you're putting on a new set of contact lenses that you never
Right.
had before, and yeah, you can't take off the lenses. That's the only difference.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think one thing I just wanted to very briefly ask you at the end, and it's something I watched your YouTube video on it and mentioned about it, and it made me very sensitized to it. And that is the use of the word to fill in the gaps. I watched your video, and then I was having a meeting with my sales manager, and it seemed like every second word he said was after watching your video. And it made me very, very conscious about myself too, because I know I'm guilty of it. But give us a tip on how to avoid that, how to reprogram ourselves to stop doing it, because a lot of us naturally fall into filling in the gaps with the
Absolutely, and you're pretty good at it yourself. You probably said like 3 or 4, but who's counting, right? I'm kidding. I'm just messing.
Can I I'll butt in there for a minute too, because the thing is, Brenden, when we come to edit it too, I need to be good at it or get better at it, because I need to delete them out. So when we go to edit, we delete out the ums. It's okay for the guests, but for me, I need to set a standard. So for me to fill in gaps with ums doesn't bode well. It doesn't look good or sound good. So the less I do it, the easier it's going to become with editing. So I'm trying to work on that. So I'd love a tip in that regard.
Yeah, of course, happy to serve. And that's what podcast hosts always say about me. They go, "Oh, well, we can spend less time editing Brendan's parts."
Yes, that's right.
Right, and I'm happy to serve here. So what I would say, Paul, is the key to removing filler words is to first understand why we say them in the first place. And the reason is because whenever we forget what we want to say in a conversation, we use filler words to buy us time. So let's say Paul asks me a question, I go and I don't know the answer. I would say, yeah, Paul, so this is actually how I would think about it. So notice I used filler words to buy time. Yeah. But what the best speakers on the planet do is they replace those ums and ahs with silences. So let's say Paul asks me a question I don't have the answer to. Paul, that's a really great question. And here's how I would approach this. So notice how, instead of going, yeah, Paul, great point. I paused, I looked straight at the camera, and then I went ahead and gave the answer. But notice how you don't really feel the difference unless somebody goes, So the strategy I have to practice this is what I call the endless gaze. So all you have to do is take a partner in your house. I like doing it in person, so do it with friends and family around you, whatever is possible for you, wherever you live, and just stare at them for 5 minutes and don't say anything. It's excruciatingly painful. You can blink, by the way. It's not a blinking contest, but you have to just say nothing. And what this does is it improves your ability to pause for excruciatingly long periods of time. It's like a tool. So when you go back to your presentation, you don't have to pause for 5 minutes, but because you did the harder thing, it's going to be much easier for you to pause for 1, 2, or even 3 seconds when you're on a podcast interview or just giving a presentation.
It's interesting. So I remember, I think I was reading or maybe watching someone talk about this very issue and say about how people perceive to be more intelligent that have pauses between what they say. So taking that on board and what you've said, you can turn in a situation which potentially feels uncomfortable because you're struggling to think of the answer to actually make yourself look more intelligent by pausing. And as you did, maybe by putting your hand on your chin or whatever, to really reinforce that sort of an intelligent kind of projection. So it could work to your betterment if you learn the skill of it.
Absolutely. I think that's the key is it's an art, right? Rather than a science, but it's an art that you can learn. It doesn't take that long. I didn't start with no filler words out of, my childhood. It was, hey, I intentionally focused on this for a few weeks, a few months, but I didn't have the strategy that I'm teaching you all now. I just kind of went in it cold turkey, but now you have the strategy. You could probably master this in a few weeks if you really wanted to.
Right. All right, Brenden. Well, thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable talking to you, and certainly it's something that I think we all need to improve our skills on. So for you, you offer consultancy services. So out of interest, how do you do that? Do you, for instance, do it like, say, for instance, if someone was here in New Zealand, do you have clients overseas? How does it work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the programs work for us, and you're absolutely right on this, all of our coaching is done virtually. So we have clients all across the globe. And it's a 12-week group coaching program between 7 and 9 executives slash entrepreneurs, where we help them really refine every angle of communication until they're absolutely bulletproof.
And with that, when you're just describing that course, is it actually done when you've got multiple people working together? It's not one-on-one, it's in a group, and therefore you're talking in front of others, presenting in front of others?
That's correct. What we've found is the small groups, not big groups, these are really small. We're talking 7, 8 people, works a lot better than big groups or one-on-one because you get a lot more practice in. And then during the week, the executives get paired up into accountability groups,
Right.
books, and then they practice with each other. So the average client gets 5 hours of practice in a week if they want to, based on their availabilities versus just one.
Right. All right. Well, sounds good. Well, what we'll do is I'll get all your links and we'll put that in the notes as well for the podcast. So anyone that wants to reach out to you will have all your details. But in the meantime, Brenden, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm definitely going to work on my communication skills and see if I can improve a bit, but certainly super impressed by yours and your ability to deliver in such a great way, and just one in which is going to resonate with a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Honor was mine, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.